Get away from her! Stay back!
The wind that morning did not whisper. It howled, dragging sheets of dust across the empty frontier road as if the earth itself wanted to erase what had happened there. Clara Whitmore lay half-conscious in the dirt, her once white wedding dress torn and stained the color of dried sorrow, her cheek pressed against the cold ground as though she were listening for a heartbeat beneath the soil. She had traveled across states with nothing but a small suitcase, a folded newspaper advertisement, and a fragile belief that somewhere in the West, a decent man waited to call her his wife. She had imagined a porch swing, warm bread cooling by the window, laughter carried by prairie wind. Instead, she found cruelty wearing a groom's smile. The man who had answered her letters, Edgar Hollis, had greeted her at the train station with charm polished smooth as river stone, but by nightfall that charm splintered into something dark and merciless. He had seen her not as a partner but as property, not as a promise but as a purchase. 3 weeks into her new life, Clara learned that isolation could be weaponized. The nearest neighbor was miles away. The town sheriff owed Edgar favors. And when Clara's hopeful letters home suddenly stopped, no one in Boston knew to wonder why. On the night she finally tried to run, clutching her suitcase and the last photograph of her parents, Edgar caught her before she reached the stable. His anger was not loud, it was cold, methodical. By dawn, she was beaten, her body trembling, and she was dragged onto the road like something discarded. "No one will come for you," he told her before riding away. "Out here, the wind buries everything." Hours passed. The sun climbed. Clara drifted between pain and memory, wondering if this was how her story would end, not with love, but with dust filling her lungs. Then she heard it, the steady rhythm of hoofs. At first, she thought it was Edgar returning to finish what he started. But the sound was different, unhurried, grounded, like the earth itself breathing. Through blurred vision, she saw boots hit the dirt. A shadow fell over her, broad and steady. "Ma'am," a low voice said, rough but not unkind. "Can you hear me?" His name was Thomas Callahan, though most folks just called him Tom. He was a cattle rancher whose land stretched beyond the northern ridge, a man known for speaking little and working hard. He had been riding into town for supplies when he spotted the shape on the road. At first, he thought it was debris caught in the wind. Then he saw the torn lace. Tom knelt beside her carefully, as if she were made of glass. He had seen hardship before, droughts that cracked the earth, storms that swallowed fences, but the sight of a young woman abandoned like refuse stirred something fierce in his chest. Clara tried to speak, but only a whisper escaped. Tom removed his hat, shading her face from the sun. "You're safe now," he said, and though she had no reason to believe him, the steadiness in his voice wrapped around her like a blanket. He lifted her gently, ignoring the curious stares when he rode into town with her cradled against him. The doctor worked in silence, stitching wounds and muttering about cruelty that had no place in civilized land. Tom remained outside the room, jaw clenched, hat in his hands. When Clara woke again, she was in a modest bedroom at the ranch, the scent of clean linen and pine filling the air. Panic rose in her chest until she saw the distance between her and the doorway, the way the chair beside her bed held a folded blanket and nothing more. Tom stood near the window, giving her space. "You're at my place," he said quietly. "Didn't seem right leaving you in town." She studied him, the sun-weathered skin, the tired kindness in his eyes. "Why?" she asked, her voice fragile. Tom hesitated, searching for words he wasn't used to speaking. "Because someone should've." Days turned into a cautious rhythm. Clara learned that Tom rose before dawn, that he whistled softly while fixing fences, that he left a glass of water by her bedside each night without fail. He never asked questions she wasn't ready to answer. When she flinched at sudden sounds, he pretended not to notice, giving her dignity in her healing. But healing was not a straight road. Nightmares dragged her back to Edgar's laughter. She would wake shaking, convinced she was still on that road. One night, the storm outside rattled the shutters, and Clara found herself unable to breathe. Before she realized it, she had stepped into the hallway. Tom was already there, lantern in hand. He didn't reach for her. He simply sat on the floor a few feet away. "Storm'll pass," he said gently. "They always do." Something inside her cracked, not in pain, but in release. For the first time since arriving in the West, Clara cried not from fear, but from relief. Weeks later, Edgar rode onto Tom's land with fury in his eyes. Word had reached him that Clara was alive, and staying. He demanded her return, claiming she was his lawful wife. Tom stood tall, silent but immovable. The confrontation drew ranch hands and neighbors. Clara stepped onto the porch, her bruises faded but her resolve sharpened. "I am not your property," she said, her voice carrying across the yard. The wind seemed to pause. Edgar laughed, but it rang hollow. The town sheriff, who had once turned a blind eye, now faced a crowd unwilling to stay silent. Sometimes courage is contagious. Edgar left that day with nothing but dust in his wake. It was not a dramatic gunfight that saved Clara, it was something quieter, something braver, a community choosing decency over fear. And through it all, Tom never claimed to be her hero. He simply offered her a choice. "You can stay," he told her one evening as they watched the sun melt into gold beyond the fields. "Not because you owe me, but because you deserve a place that feels like yours." Clara looked at the land, at the fence posts she had helped mend, at the horse she had learned to ride again despite trembling hands. She realized healing wasn't about forgetting the road where she was abandoned. It was about walking forward despite it. Months later, she stood in a simple dress, not white, not symbolic, just honest, beside Tom beneath an open sky. Their vows were not grand declarations. They were promises of respect, of partnership, of choosing each other every day. The wind that once threatened to bury her now lifted her hair gently, as if in blessing. Clara understood then that being broken did not mean being unworthy. That sometimes the darkest chapters exist so we can recognize the light when it finds us. And somewhere beyond the ridge, the road where she once lay abandoned stretched on, empty and powerless. If this story moved you, if you believe that even the most shattered beginnings can lead to powerful new chapters, make sure you subscribe to the channel and join a community that celebrates resilience, redemption, and the kind of love that doesn't rescue to possess, but to protect and uplift. Because out here, in stories like Clara's, we're reminded that storms pass, courage grows, and sometimes, just sometimes, the right person arrives when hope feels lost, and changes everything.